Today I want to talk to you about alternate as well as slightly traditional quilt edgings. Okay. Most often everybody does a binding where you sew your binding onto the front of your quilt, you turn it to the back and you hand sew it down. I'm not real fond of hand sewing, so I do mine all by machine. I start with my binding on the back, sew it down, and what do you do when you get to the corner, you ask? You sew up to the corner, you flip your piece of binding, I'm not in the right area, am I? There we go. Okay. So, working backwards, I have to think a little bit here. You flip your binding up to give yourself your 45-degree angle. Okay. You put it down and you start sewing. You continue on. This is what you have actually sewn. You sew up to the corner and you start again on the next side. Okay? What I do next is I press my binding just straight out. I don't fold it over to press it, just press the edges. When I come to the corners, I trim the corner. Okay? I fold one side in, I fold the other side in. It makes that nice mitered edge. I will press just the corner when I do this. Okay? And then, as I go around sewing, I fold it over, and you just have to do this with your fingers. It almost folds itself. I sew up to the corner. I give it a little tack here in the corner and continue on around. Okay? That gives you, on the back, your line will either go right next to your binding or sometimes it goes up on it. But what has to look pretty is the front. And that's nice and even and flat with a nice square corner. Okay. Here's an example of that on an actual project. Okay. You can see the top stitching. And on the back, particularly if you use the same color thread as the rest of your quilting, it goes next to your binding and you don't notice it as an additional line of quilting. Okay. For some small projects that don't get a lot of handling, there is still a use for having your backing larger all the way around than your front, okay, and folding it to the front. I always, whatever size you want it, I usually do about 1.5 inches. I will fold that over. In the corners, you need to make sure to get that corner piece in, fold. It's like wrapping a present. You fold that in, and again, that's going to give you your nice mitered edge. Okay? Again, you top stitch around that, and on the back, it just gives you another line of stitching. Some of my favorite edgings don't include bindings. Okay? We have the classic envelope finish, where you take your piece of backing, you lay your quilt on the top of it. You sew all the way around the edges of your quilt. You turn it, okay? You leave an opening for turning. And you press it nicely. Now there's two good ways to finish this. You can leave it just like this and hand stitch the opening closed. I often top stitch all the way around. This is already tucked in and pressed. I top stitch right over it. I don't have to do the hand sewing. Okay? Another method that gives you the same result as this, you take your totally finished quilt, okay? Again, you put your piece of fabric face up with your quilt. You sew all the way around. Then you turn it, or then you sew an opening, cut an opening. Gosh, you cut an opening, all right? You can make it be any shape as long as you have a nice edge. You press that down. You have to then turn your edge under and you applique it down. Okay? That involves a lot of hand sewing. I don't do that very often. I prefer this finish. Okay? On this beaded project over here, that is the finish that I did. I just turned the edge with the backing. Then I put some additional stitching in it to hold them together. Okay? One of my favorite edge finishings is to just put a little sparkle along the edge. This is a satin stitch with metallic thread. It's particularly good for pieces that you might want to layer and to put this piece perhaps on top of another quilted part, all right? The issue with this type of edging is that it takes a lot of thread to make a really nice satin stitch edge. If you are making a satin stitch edge, this is one pass of the thread, okay? You often have to go 2 or 3 times to fill that in. Okay. I learned a cute little trick to not have to do that so many times. You take your finished piece. I do a stay stitch, either a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch around the edge. Then I use a cotton thread. This is just like the cotton thread that you might knit a dish rag out of. Okay. I do have a braiding foot on my sewing machine, but you can do this with a regular zigzag foot. And as I sew, I'll zigzag over with the same color thread over the cord. That cord fills that edge up. And you get a nice, full-looking edge finish. Okay. I love that particularly because it allows me to do irregular edges. Okay? All you have to do is do a stay stitch along there, cut it, just whatever shape you want, and put that cording on it, and you have a really cool looking edge finish. I also do a lot of little funky art postcards. You don't need to spend hours and hours finishing the edges on those. This is a piece of fabric that has fusible on it. You put it on both sides, you fuse it down, you're done. It has a little wavy edge because I have a rotary cutter that has the wave edge blade. Another way to do a quick binding is add some decorative stitches from your sewing machine. You can do the flipping over to the top and put a decorative edge on it. You can also do those decorative stitches on the fused edge. Another way that would seal something that you don't necessarily want to use, but perhaps it would be a wall hanging, you can use regular acrylic paint. And I made this quite wide so you can see it, but you could do a very narrow edge of the same color as your fabric. You want to get some paint into the batting, a little bit on the back, and as wide as you want it on the front. That seals the edge. You can stitch over the top of it, but you don't need to. This is not going to fray, it's not going to come apart, but it's not something that you want to throw in the washer for a piece that you're going to use. And one of my favorite things to do is a light zigzag stitch around the edge, and then put something funky over the top of it. I've done yarn, I've done ribbon, I've done raggedy pieces of fabric just hanging off the edge, and you just put it along the edge, zigzag over the top of it, and you have something that's a little bit out of the ordinary. Okay, and that's the alternate edge finishes that I have to show you today. What kind of questions do you have? Yes, ma'am.
What kind of foot?
Most often I will use an open toe embroidery foot. I also love my Bernina couching foot. They may not your manufacturer may not call it a couching foot, they may call it a braiding foot. Sometimes a couching foot or a piping foot has little narrow channels, but a braiding foot will have a hole to put the whatever it is you're using, the yarn or thread, and then a deeper channel in the back that allows that foot to slide over a thicker piece of equipment or piece of thread. Okay.
When you bring the binding to the front of the quilt, you press that binding first? Feels like a second.
Okay, the question is, if you didn't hear, when I bring the binding over from the back to the front, do I press it? Before I put it on, I have it pressed together. This one? This one? Yes. Yes. Yep. I fold it halfway in and press it down. Okay? And then I fiddle with the corners and get them nice and pretty and 45 degrees. And I give that a shot with the iron. I get the corners first. Then I will continue on folding. Depending on how well behaved your fabric is, you may want to press. You don't always need to. Sometimes it'll just fold over as nice cotton, very nice, and you just sew it right down. If it's giving you a lot of trouble, if your piece is thick, you might want to press it first. Okay. The only time that I use that is if I'm doing a fusible binding. The question was, do I ever use fusible under the binding as I'm turning it and putting it in? I believe that Sharon Schomber has a really good video tutorial on how to do perfect bindings using glues and fusibles, and I can recommend that, but for my style of quilting, I am much less precise. So I'm kind of happy with the machine and flip the binding over and sew it down. You get more finish that way, I think. but she wins prizes. Yes, ma'am.
How do you prevent your metallic thread from breaking?
The best hints that I got on all thread work is a book called Thread Work Unraveled by Sarah Ann Smith. That's an AQS book. But for metallics specifically, I use a large-eyed needle, either a top stitch needle or a metallic needle. I loosen my top tension almost to zero a lot of times, and sometimes you have to play with the bobbin thread and get something that's more compatible with what you're using. A lot of times that thin metallic is happier with a thin bobbin thread. The question is, when I'm using yarn or alternate fabrics for that finish, do I ever use monofilament thread? I do not use monofilament thread only because I don't like, to me it's a plastic look, and I would rather use threads that match the colors I'm working with, or a rayon thread that has a little shine, or a variegated thread that adds a little more color to the edge. Okay? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Are all your techniques in your book?
No, these techniques are not in the book. The book is almost all about piecing. Okay? These techniques I just brought to you for the demo. Okay? All right, how many of you do a more traditional binding? You sew it on the front, and okay. Anybody willing to try the machine? Yay! You will get a lot more done that way, but I still recommend, if you are entering shows, to do it that more traditional way. You do have a lot more control over what you're doing. The machine is quick. Yes, ma'am. No, because the question, if you didn't hear, she sews her binding on the front first and then flips it over to the back and uses a specialty foot that will sew both at the, it goes right in the ditch and will catch that back thread. I haven't tried that. I'm certainly open to trying that. The reason that I do the back first and then the front is that, to me, I want to make sure that the front looks good, and my back, if my binding isn't totally accurate, or my hand slips, I'm not going to tear it out and redo it, and any goof ups don't show. Okay? All right, I hope you go out and try some of these. A lot of the information, if you go on the internet and just look for alternate edge finishes, you're going to find a lot more than I even brought to you today, but those are some of my favorites. Okay, thank you.